Okay, good morning, everyone. We will begin the session now. Thank you so much for those of you joining us in the roundtable, and also all of you joining us through Zoom platform and also through YouTube. A very good morning to everyone. My name is Shafiah Muhibat, and I will be the moderator for the first session, and I will also be the MC for the whole of the duration of the event. Welcome to the CSIS-GRIPS-RSIS Policy Research Network on Contemporary Southeast Asia Conference on Indo-Pacific Cooperation, Way Forward for the ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific. It will be held in 3 sessions today, so morning until a little bit in the afternoon time for Jakarta time, and we will continue on later on in the evening for the last session, session 3. So without further ado, I will start with the opening remarks from the 3 organizers of this event. The first one will be from Mr. Yusuf Wanandi, who is the Vice Chairman of the Board of Trustees, Center for Strategic and International Studies Foundation. Pak Yusuf, you have the screen now.
Thank you. Good morning for everybody. Welcome to this webinar that we are going to have for the next 2 days on the Indo-Pacific cooperation. And that means, you know, the way forward for the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific. And in fact, it is actually also an exercise how we should cooperate in the implementation of it. The greatest geopolitical challenge confronting ASEAN is how to navigate the increasing strategic competition between the United States and China in Southeast Asia. First, the prospect of Southeast Asia becoming a battleground and both influence and arms should not be discounted. Second, as the great powers strive to shape the regional order to its own interests, their contrasting visions of regional order pose the risk of rendering ASEAN irrelevant. The coronavirus pandemic has also underlined the need for countries in the Indo-Pacific to cooperate on particular areas of public health, such as an equitable distribution of vaccines, information sharing and transparency, and border management, and the economic recovery after pandemics. Against this backdrop, ASEAN's core strategic interests remain, and that is maintaining its centrality and strategic autonomy. In order to achieve this, ASEAN must preserve its unity among members and continue to play the role of manager of the regional security architecture. The ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific is ASEAN's attempt to deal with this, spurred by Indonesia. First, AOIP is efficient to mitigate the strategic rivalry among major powers. Second, it aims to ensure the ASEAN centrality and relevance as a manager of the regional order. Third, the AOIP is an articulation of a regional vision that is inclusive and rules-based. Since last year, we have tried to talk and explain about AOIP, which is until now is merely an outlook. It is not yet a strategy. We need a strategy to operationalize such vision. There has been a wealth of cooperation initiatives in the region, as well between ASEAN and its dialogue partners. Finding the common threads among these with AOIP can help us advance the ASEAN vision of a regional order. Since last year, CSIS, GRIPS, and RSIS have come together to organize a series of webinars on the evolving regional dynamics, the economic order, especially as the coronavirus pandemic hit all of us, and the regional cooperation initiatives under the framework of AOIP. Through these activities, we have gathered initial ideas on how to expand the cooperation in the Indo-Pacific region within the spirit of AOIP. I am confident that the esteemed experts gathered virtually today and tomorrow can enrich these ideas and provide their views on the opportunities and challenges on how to move forward with this cooperation. I look forward for the discussion and to hear your views on how to advance cooperation under the framework of AOIP. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, Pak Yusuf. Next is Ambassador Yutaka Imura, who is Senior Fellow at the National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies in Japan, who is also a co-organizer of this conference today. Ambassador Imura, you have the screen.
Thank you very much, Fifi, and good morning, everyone. First of all, I'd like to express my heartfelt gratitude to the CSIS, particularly Mr. Yusuf Wanandi, for hosting this conference. I would also like to show appreciation to Ambassador Ong Kim-yong and his colleagues at RSIS Singapore, who worked very hard to make this conference happen. The conference is a result of joint works of three organizations, CSIS, RSIS, and GRIPS. It aims at exchanging views on the way forward for the Indo-Pacific cooperation, particularly for the ASEAN's outlook on the Indo-Pacific, with the participation of scholars and academics representing research institutes of ASEAN member countries and its dialogue partners. Taking advantage of this opportunity, I wish to say just a few words about our basic thinking on the AOIP and our suggestions on how to advance this ASEAN's proposal. Since the beginning of the 2010s, a view has emerged that sees the Indian and Pacific Oceans as a single strategic space. The importance of this vast region is undeniable. Firstly, it is becoming an arena for strategic competition between the United States and China. Secondly, the Indo-Pacific region is developing as an economic growth center, accounting for 50% of the world economy and 50% of the world's population. Thirdly, the Indian and Pacific Oceans are located on the key sea lanes connecting the Middle East and Africa with East Asia, but they face a variety of security challenges, including moves to change the status quo in the maritime order, piracy, terrorism, proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, and natural disasters, among others. In 2016, Japan proposed the Free and Open Indo-Pacific FOIP initiative, believing that for the sake of peace and prosperity of the international community, the Indo-Pacific region with those characteristics should become a stage for international cooperation and collaboration rather than a stage for geopolitical confrontation. Since then, the United States, Australia, India, France, and United Kingdom, Netherlands, and European Union have announced their respective positions on the future of the Indo-Pacific. On the other hand, 2019, ASEAN, which could be an intersection of the coordinated axis of Indo-Pacific cooperation, announced ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific AOIP. Japan quickly expressed its strong support for the AOIP and has made clear its willingness to cooperate with ASEAN to materialize the proposal, as well as its belief that it is important to seek synergy between the AOIP and FOIP. In order for the region to become an arena for international cooperation and collaboration, where international law is respected and freedom of navigation is enjoyed by all nations. The two following conditions are crucially important. First, strategic equilibrium should be restored, together with the mechanism of international coordination and cooperation, which stabilizes it. Many eminent scholars, by the way, have reflected on the 100 years of relative stability maintained on the European continent after the Vienna Conference, and have cited the balance of power among the great nations as the most important factor for the longevity of the peace. When Indonesian President Yudhoyono visited Japan in 2005, nearly 20 years ago, he told Japanese leaders that in order to maintain stability in the East Asia, the strategic equilibrium must be restored, and the outside powers must be engaged in the region for this purpose. It has been nearly 20 years since then, but has the situation improved? The answer is clearly no, in my view. On the contrary, the region seems to be gradually sliding into an arms race, following China's rapid military buildup. Given the seriousness of the situation, it is particularly important now that strategic balance be re-established between China and the democracies. However, the balance of power alone cannot ensure peace and stability. It is important that major powers restrain themselves so that international relations do not become decisively confrontational and take the path toward stabilizing their relations. To this end, it will be necessary not only to establish mechanism for crisis management between the US and China, but also to start exploring the stability of disarmament and arms control agreements between the US, China, Russia, and some other major powers. Furthermore, it is my sincere hope that regional cooperation initiatives, such as ASEAN-led AOIP that we are discussing today, will be of a nature to promote cooperation between the United States and China. Secondly, the respect for the centrality of unity of ASEAN is essential for the stability of the Indo-Pacific region. The ASEAN is a key region, the fate of which will determine the future course of two oceans. Unfortunately, ASEAN seems to be now becoming the main theater of a competition for sphere of influence between China and the democracies. For the stability of the region, it is essential that ASEAN exists as a peaceful and neutral entity, not under the sphere of influence of any of the major powers, and in a manner that maintains its unity. For this to happen, it will be necessary for outside powers to behave in a self-restrained manner, and to ASEAN countries themselves not to be distracted by short-term interests, not to lose their autonomy, and not to lose solidarity among ASEAN countries. In addition to Japan and other countries that have already expressed a strong willingness to cooperate with ASEAN for the AOIP, it is important for other partners, including China and Russia, to support ASEAN in playing a central role in such cooperation. This will help make the Indo-Pacific a truly cooperative and collaborative arena, rather than an arena of confrontation. Unfortunately, to date, the AOIP has remained a mere slogan. It is hoped that ASEAN will promptly establish a mechanism for the realization of the AOIP and at least a roadmap for it. I hope that today's AOIP conference will provide an opportunity to discuss the implementation of the AOIP, and it will eventually lead to a track 2 process of the AOIP, so that governments can consider the views of private sectors and academia. In this regard, I'd like to mention several points at this stage, which should be borne in our mind in the process of realization of the AOIP. Firstly, I have already mentioned the importance of the respect for ASEAN's centrality and unity. In addition, as the basic principles and norms which shall be the basis of the Indo-Pacific cooperation, the rule of law, freedom of navigation, and openness cannot be overemphasized. Secondly, the inclusiveness should be also one of the guiding principles of the Indo-Pacific cooperation. If we really want to see the AOIP succeed as a project of peace rather than a project of division, the door to the AOIP should remain open to any country willing to cooperate. Thirdly, while the Indo-Pacific cooperation should address to the AOIP's four main cooperation areas, namely maritime cooperation, connectivity, SDGs, and other economic cooperation, we need to give urgent priority to certain areas, given the serious impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, such as stepping up the vaccination process, improvement of the medical system, building resilient supply chains, and to gradually shift our attention to post-pandemic economic recovery. Fourthly, lastly, the importance of the multilateral approach. Already some concrete steps have been taken to advance the AOIP initiative. For example, at the ASEAN-Japan Summit 2020, Japan announced 49 projects in line with ASEAN's 4 targets area. At this year's summit, we presented 24 additional projects, making the total number of projects to 73, and made public the progress report for those projects. I understand that some other dialogue partners, like the Republic of Korea and India, also doing the same in one way or another. On the other hand, I have to admit that those are still the efforts conducted by individual countries. What we need now is to step up Indo-Pacific cooperation from a bilateral one to an ASEAN-led multilateral one. While almost 3 years have passed since the AOIP concept was born, and though probably partly due to the pandemic, we have not yet seen its concrete vision and roadmap. If the process is delayed, I'm afraid that contrary to the original intention of ASEAN to regain the initiative in the Indo-Pacific cooperation, ASEAN's centrality might be gradually undermined. With the increasing number of non-member countries expressing their willingness to engage in the Indo-Pacific cooperation and collaborate with ASEAN, it is probably high time for ASEAN to move ahead and to seize opportunity to place itself as the driving force of the regional cooperation for peace and prosperity. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Imura. Next, I would like to invite Ambassador Ong Keng Yong, Executive Deputy Chairman of the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies in Singapore. Ambassador Ong, you have the screen.
Thank you. A good day to everyone from the region and outside Southeast Asia. Thank you for allowing us to have this gathering. I have also heard the 2 preceding speakers. Maybe let me just say a few words to share with you our thoughts, our RSIS thinking on this particular joint venture which RSIS has embarked on with CSIS and GRIPS in Japan. Well, the conference of this nature require a lot of preparation. And we first started in September 2019. Yeah, it's part of an effort we call Policy Research Network on Contemporary Southeast Asia, PRNSEA. Since September 2019, experts and researchers from more than 20 research institutions in our region have participated in different seminars and discussion online. We basically look at the challenges faced by the Southeast Asian region, how to obtain consensus and understanding on the themes and processes for the necessary research envisaged under the PRN-SEA network. In the past 2 years or so, we have basically worked out several joint research projects, and some interesting research papers have been produced. And as we do so, the AOIP, the topic of AOIP has become more and more saline in our research work and our exchange of views. Whatever it is, we have looked at the developments in our region set within the context of the AOIP. And as you have heard Yutaka Imura say, the AOIP basically envisaged 4 cooperation areas, namely maritime cooperation, connectivity, UN Sustainable Development Goals, and other economic and possible areas of cooperation. Basically, from my perspective as a former Secretary General of ASEAN, the AOIP brought together all the different strands and views on what ASEAN, together with its dialogue partner, can do to develop the vision of an Indo-Pacific cooperative framework. This conference on AOIP, I feel, is quite important because I don't think there has been any other such venture with the kind of agenda that we have set for ourselves. The agenda that we have laid down can be seen in the program of this conference before you. It reflects what we have done so far for the past 2 years or so, and what we hope we can further obtain from this discussion under this particular research track 2 framework. So far, I see there are many experts from different ASEAN and ASEAN dialogue partner countries gathering together to look at all the possible areas where we can do more and get more and contribute to regional peace and security. Let me say a few words about the AOIP. From my ASEAN experience, I thought that when ASEAN as a group came out with the AOIP, it was trying to bring together the different perspectives, different visions and strategies other countries, some of them big powers, have put together. And we try to make some sense to navigate through these different concepts, strategies and vision. And in a very uniquely ASEAN way, we pull together all that we have been talking about, all that we've been doing each other in ASEAN, as well as the surrounding neighborhood, which covers big countries in our region, as well as the United States of America. So today we have this AOIP, but bear in mind that AOIP is not a particular brand of strategy or vision. It is basically putting together what we already have in our region and what ASEAN as a community has evolved over the past decade or so. So we need to substantiate it. In other words, we need to put substance into the AOIP, and hopefully by doing so, we will also be connecting with the other people's, other countries' strategy and vision for the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. So over the past 2 years or so, we have talked about various topics, and we have prepared papers, and we hope that many of these ideas will be further crystallized and become more practical projects on the ground. Of course, we cannot ignore the geopolitics and economic and digitalization processes going on in our region. And preceding speakers have talked about the COVID-19 pandemic and all the disruptions that that pandemic has continued to wreak on our respective society and our economies. So looking at this context, we feel that we in RSIS feel that this conference and the various work that we embarked on so far will continue to contribute to a better understanding of what we in the Asia-Pacific region need to do in order to get the kind of desired result that the AOIP has projected across to all of us. Of course, in the coming years, we expect more meaty stuff to be put onto the AOIP as the ASEAN member states clarify their own strategic thinking and their practical cooperation with one another. So, looking forward, we participate in this conference with the idea of adding more to the knowledge that we have acquired so far, and hopefully we can also navigate some of the tracks that we will have to embark on in order to take into account recent developments in our region. For example, the substantiation of Quad, then the formulation of AUKUS, and on top of that, I think our ASEAN region, we also have to deal with our own social and economic development, the disruption caused by COVID-19, as well as the climate change and environment degradation that we are witnessing in our ASEAN region. So overall, I think the panel that we have constructed for this, the panel discussion that we have constructed for this conference will add substance to all these concerns, and hopefully we can have a very good exchange of views and the way going forward between today and tomorrow in our discussions. So I think I should stop here. At least I want to reflect on what we have done so far and how we in RSIS envisage going forward. There is a lot of interest in ASEAN, in spite of all the difficulties that we have encountered as a region, as a regional body. I think ASEAN is still in business, and I think we can organize ourselves more systematically going forward. There are issues like the situation in Myanmar and other problems related to climate change effects and economic difficulties. But overall, I believe that ASEAN is still a very good framework, a very good regional body for us to bank on and achieve more out of this hope that we have for ASEAN as a regional grouping. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Ong, and also to Pak Yusuf Wanandi and Ambassador Imura for your opening remarks. I think we can now start directly to the first session. The first session is titled Evolving Strategic Environment and a Free and Open Order Based on the Rule of Law in Indo-Pacific. So if we follow up from the remarks from the opening session, during which we discussed about, discussing about the future of the ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific, I think the first session is set to be the basis, the fundamental discussion discussing about the changing environment and the changes that Indo-Pacific is going through at the moment, and relates that to the free and open order based on the rule of law. And for that, we have 4 speakers. But before I move to the speakers, let me explain a little bit on how we design this conference today. So basically, we will have, this is designed as a virtual roundtable. So those of you joining us as panelists in Zoom, this is forming our online roundtable. But at the same time, this is also relayed to the public. So those of you joining us in Zoom as attendees or joining us through our live stream in YouTube. Those of you in the roundtable can directly make comments or ask questions after the 4 trigger speakers speak. by virtually raising your hand, or those of you joining us as attendees can also ask questions by typing it in the Q&A feature in Zoom. So we will begin by the four trigger speakers who will set the tone for the discussion. And for that, first, I would like to welcome Dr. Le Dinh Tinh, Director General of the Institute for Foreign Policy and Strategic Studies, Diplomatic Academy of Vietnam. Dr. Le, you have 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Fifi. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you and see you clearly.
Thank you very much, and a very good morning from Hanoi. It's now the autumn time in Hanoi. It's very good breeze. It's an honor for me to be part of this meaningful conversation, and for that reason, I'm very thankful to the organizers, namely CSIS Indonesia, the GRIPS from Japan, and ISIS Singapore. And it's also a great pleasure for me to be connected, even though virtually, to many of the colleagues from ASEAN, particularly senior colleagues from ASEAN and from ASEAN partners countries. So it's an honor for me to speak on this topic. And for me, it's a very timely discussion. It's not just because of 2 years after the introduction of the AOIP that we need to sit down together and review what has been done and what should have been done better. But also because of the changes in the circumstances in which we think about what we should do to respond to the contingencies and the unfolding events, and most notably the COVID-19 pandemic and the increasing great power rivalry, and also the fourth industrial revolution. So all of this give added value to the discussion today, I think. So in the interest of time, let me focus on three major points of what I thought on the given topic of the evolving strategic environment and the rules-based regional order in the Indo-Pacific. First, I think with the changes in the circumstances, I think there are both opportunities and challenges for ASEAN countries and ASEAN partners to promote a regional rules-based order. And the reason I say so is because of the three following reasons. Reason number one, I think one of the most effective way to deal with the uncertainty and the unpredictability is, the possibility of us having a clear-eyed rules of engagement for all parties concerned. Okay, so this is the time for us to need more rules, not less. The second reason is, I think for regional and global governance to be effective, we need rules and regulations, to provide, among other things, transparency, openness, inclusivity, equality, and respect for sovereignty. Without rules, it is impossible for us to achieve those goals and principles. And the third reason is, as a matter of fact, there have emerged new issues and areas that ask for now rather than later rules and protocol, from vaccine distribution to supply chain, realignment to the cyberspace. We in ASEAN, we badly need those new rules to guide us forward. So those are the three reasons why I think, with the fast changing situation in our region, it reinforces the necessity of us, to promote a regional rules-based order. Now, let me move to my second point, which is, we've been hearing this, for years, that there have been praise and critiques, okay, to ASEAN and to roles of ASEAN in responding to regional affairs and its own affairs. But the argument that I would like to put forward here is we need to manage our expectations vis-a-vis ASEAN and ASEAN's capability in ensuring a rules-based international order and regional rules-based order. And the reason I'm saying so, because first, ASEAN via its key vehicles, such as the TAC and the AOIP, functions as a norm shaper. Okay, so ASEAN is a norm setter, and there's no doubt that the setting of the norms is a very necessary function, an area of strength of ASEAN. And I heard from the previous speakers confirming, that strength of ASEAN being a norm shaper. Okay, and yesterday I joined my colleagues in Hanoi to receive the Foreign Minister of Australia, who made a visit to Vietnam. And she also mentioned the fact that because ASEAN provides the norms and the rules of engagement for the region, so Australia support ASEAN centrality. Okay, Australia support ASEAN centrality because ASEAN is capable of giving the rules of engagement for regional partners. And the second reason that proves that ASEAN is also capable is because ASEAN is not only a norm shaper, but ASEAN is also a doer. If we look at the community building efforts by ASEAN and the substantive partnerships that ASEAN has sustained with its dialogue partners and development partners over the years, are vivid examples of ASEAN being an effective doer. But also because the reason that I say we need to manage our expectation, because ASEAN is not the EU. And then, could you please give me an example of somebody who excels at both, shaping the norms and also implement it in reality? We don't have that much of, narrative, to prove that, somebody can be both a norm setter and an excellent doer. And not to mention the fact that ASEAN is mostly comprised of small and medium countries, not with a very high level of development. So that is the reason why I say we need to manage our expectation. And to be fair, to do some justice to ASEAN. So ASEAN mastermind the evolving regional security architecture, but ASEAN is not the only one who constructed. Okay, but we need the participation of other stakeholders to realize that security architecture. And lastly, let me move to my final point, the third point. So I'm trying to make the case that ASEAN is relevant, but absolutely there is still room for development for ASEAN. So let me offer some quick thoughts on the AOIP and the implementation of it for the sake of efficiency. First, I think ASEAN should reiterate the objectives and the principles of the AOIP, okay, not to drop them, okay? The moment we drop mentioning the objectives and the principles that laid out in the AOIP, that is the moment that ASEAN will lose its role in the region, okay? And that requires the intensity of diplomacy on the part of ASEAN, okay? So we need to promote it rather than giving a cynical view of it. That is my first recommendation. The second one is we need to do our homework, right? So ASEAN need to call on member states to take the actual implementation of the AOIP more seriously. So initiatives like the Indo-Pacific Infrastructure and Connectivity Forum initiated by Indonesia is something that we need more, not less, okay? So we need to operationalize, materialize, the principles and the objectives that we set forth in the AOIP. And the third recommendation is we need priorities of priorities, okay? So we need sharper focus of what ASEAN can do and what ASEAN should do. For example, in this particular context, I think the necessity of having a resilient ASEAN that is able to combat the COVID-19 pandemic or other emerging issues like climate disasters or the realignment of the supply chain or issues that we were able to put on our agenda in the last couple of years, which is the Mekong. So those are the the items that we need to do more and with a sharper focus. And the fourth recommendation is major and dialogue and development partners of ASEAN should take side with ASEAN and not to ask ASEAN to take side with them. Okay, and we have mechanisms led by ASEAN that provide a platform for partners to engage with us. And instead of criticizing ASEAN for not being able to deliver, these partners should conduct more substantive cooperation with ASEAN. The failure of ASEAN is not in the interest of anyone. Okay, and the fact I mentioned this to a lot of colleagues, that the fact that if ASEAN takes side with a particular country is not only not good for ASEAN itself, but also not good for that country itself. Okay, so historically, it's good for ASEAN to be neutral. Of course, we need to talk about an active neutral posture by ASEAN. But the fact that the partners of ASEAN, should see ASEAN as a good vehicle, a good regional body to invest more, not less, in this particular juncture. That is my argument. And lastly, from a Vietnamese perspective, and this is my personal perspective, I think the success of ASEAN really relies on the political commitment on the part of every individual member countries. So as far as I know, Hanoi, for example, is very serious about ASEAN and consider ASEAN one of the top foreign policy priorities now and going forward. So with that, I share the viewpoint expressed by our previous speakers that we should, maintain our deep belief in the positivism and dynamisms of ASEAN, and not less, particularly at this strategic environment. So with that, I stop and here and look forward to the discussion that follows. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dinh Tinh, for your presentation and also the positive tone setting for ASEAN. Next, we have Dr. Akihiko Tanaka, who is the president of the National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies in Japan. Dr. Tanaka, you have the screen now, please.
Well, thank you very much. First, I would like to thank Yusuf Wanandi and On Keng-yon and Imura-san for realizing this webinar. As a member of this the endeavor together with the CSIS and RSIS, I'm extremely happy that this webinar is now realized. For the purpose of this panel discussion, I would like to talk more on the current condition of the strategic environment. I generally agree with the positive notes presented by the Dr. Tin and the previous three leaders of this project, but I would like to focus more on somewhat realistic side of the current strategic conditions. And strategic environment, I believe, is determined by essentially two factors. The first factor is the US-China competition on multiple fronts, including military security front, political ideological front, and science and technological fronts. And as recently Jake Sullivan reiterated again that the US policy of engagement turned out to be wrong. The this change of US engagement policy was initiated by the Trump administration and succeeded by the Biden administration. And President Biden considered China the unique competitor with the liberal democracies. And then on the other hand, Mr. Xi Jinping appears determined to not to give in to any demand from liberal democracy, and determined to continue to prove the superiority of a Chinese model. And so this competition appears structural to the strategic environment that we are now living in. And then, in my understanding, Chinese recent behavior, whether that, in my understanding, may be contrary to the Chinese national interest, but recent Chinese behavior has brought about what I might call a grand coalition of liberal democracies. The recent formation of what's called AUKUS, the US, Australia, UK coalition, and the recent summitry of the Quad, the increasing interest of European nations in the security and prosperity of the Indo-Pacific, all indicate that the increasingly liberal democracies will get together to solidify their collaboration for the purpose of securing peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific. Recent visits by the UK aircraft carrier Queen Elizabeth and its joining exercises in the vicinity of Taiwan Strait, and the recent visit by German frigate to this region indicates the increasing interest of the Europeans in the conditions of the Indo-Pacific region. And we have observed the increasing sympathy toward Taiwan among many countries, particularly in European countries. And so I think if China had shown somewhat more restraint, this might not have happened. But it seems Chinese leaders appeared, that they would not have reason to change their course. And then under the current circumstances, then I think we have to assume that this competition continues with an increasing number of participation from other liberal democracies than the US and Japan and Australia. Now, this is the first component of the strategic environment. I would like to point out the second very important component that defines the strategic environment. That is the huge and increasing economic interdependence in the Indo-Pacific, which is the increasingly becoming the center of gravity of global economy, as Ambassador Imura mentioned. And this huge economic interdependence includes virtually all countries and economies in the region, possibly with the exception of North Korea. And this condition, huge economic interdependence, in which, well, China is the biggest trading partners of virtually all countries in the region. And China and the US are the biggest trading partners with each other. And this economic interdependence provides an environment that no one wants a war. And but then intertwined with the first factor of the strategic environment, or where competition between the US and China continues, this economic interdependence provides rather complex games of manipulation of economic interdependence. Well, sometimes economic interdependence is used to achieve certain political goals by opening up markets and closing down markets and so forth. And then looking at this, there are attempts on many parts of the countries, including the US, tendency to realign and rearrange the supply chain so that they may not be drawn into vulnerable conditions. But then overall, given the huge size of interdependence, it is unrealistic to cut off economies into two camps. And so we are living in a high level of economic interdependence, despite the continuing competition in military, political, and science technological fronts. I think the biggest danger under these circumstances is not, somebody actually wants to have a war. I think no one, I think Mr. Biden or Mr. Xi wants a war. But then under these complex circumstances, we need to first avoid accidents, particularly in areas like the Taiwan Strait, so that nations are inadvertently drawn into an unwanted. I think it is very important to create a mechanism of communications so that no accidents will escalate into unwanted military conflict. And then I believe it is very important to create an area of collaboration despite these strategic factors. And in my understanding, this area of collaboration is the future of the Indo-Pacific. And there are many projects, I think, that all countries, including the United States, Japan, China, India, and sub-Saharan African countries, together with ASEAN, to promote the better future of the Indo-Pacific. And by expanding the area of collaboration, I think we would, again, solidify the strength of economic interdependence and somehow manage the competition on military, political, and science technological fields. And in this respect, I would expect and look for very much the ASEAN's initiatives by the fleshing out the contents of AOIP. With this, I would like to stop my initial presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tanaka, for your remarks. I'll go on directly to the third speaker, who is Dr. Jae Hyon. Director of the Center for ASEAN and Ocenia Studies at the Asan Institute for Policy Studies, Republic of Korea. Dr. Lee, you have the screen now.
Thank you so much, Fifi. I first have to say thank to the CSIS, GRIPS, and RSIS for having me this wonderful conference today. The Japanese friends are enjoying the beautiful autumn weather, and my Southeast Asian friends, as always, are enjoying hot weather. But today we had first snow in this winter. Early in this morning, we had the snow. Okay, as the title of this session indicates, we have two topics to discuss. First, the strategic environment that we are facing. And the second one is kind of emerging or desirable regional order or rule-based order. On the first topic, the strategic environment that we are having today, I would like to draw kind of a big picture of what's going on. And of course, the central question of the strategic environment at the moment is US-China, the big powers rivalry. Already two previous speakers, as well as the speaker in the opening session, mentioned this strategic competition between these two superpowers. But I don't need to recap all the details of this competition, what China is doing and what the US is doing in this part of the world. But I believe there's still a chance for unintended clash, as Dr. Tanaka Akihiko just mentioned, on accidental clash between these two superpowers. But I believe the competition between the US and China would last for quite some time. From my perspective, what the US is doing is they try to outmaneuver its opponent by making a coalition of a small number of like-minded countries and capable countries only. It is evidenced by the recent development like Quad and AUKUS. The US just want some regional like-minded and capable countries on its board. And with this coalition trying to outmaneuver China, well, I think the US does not necessarily intend to get many countries on board. So many regional countries, South Pacific countries, some ASEAN countries, and some South Asian countries are untouched by the United States at the moment. And the end result of this US strategy, I believe, is another hub and spoke system. I would like to call this a modified hub and spoke system. The United States as the super hub, and some capable like-minded countries in the region are kind of semi-hub, and other remaining regional countries are kind of spoke under these semi-hubs. That's what I'm seeing as a big picture of the United States. On the other hand, China is trying to get as many countries as they can around China. As you know, China is one of the weaknesses of China's foreign policy and strategies that they don't have allies, unlike the United States. So China has been trying to get kind of an allies or coalitions or supporting base, if you like. So today China has its own resource and is willing to distribute its money and resource to build this kind of coalition or allies or supporting base around China. As you know, the Belt and Road Initiative is a very effective tool to get as many developing countries as they can around China. And the end result is Chinese economic hub and spoke system. So at the end of the day, the US modified hub and spoke system and Chinese economic hub and spoke system will clash. That's how I see the current strategic environment that we are facing. These two competing blocks of quite different natures have quite different natures, but the structure are pretty much the same. The hub and spoke, modified hub and spoke. I don't expect any immediate clash between these two blocks led by US and China, because the clash between these two blocks only will happen when they believe they have nothing to lose. So I don't see any immediate clash of these two blocks in a military ways. The second part, emerging or desirable regional order, liberal international order, rule-based order, whatever. I believe these two blocks and their competition is likely to shape the emerging order in the region. Liberal order, rule-based order, and these sounds very good. I don't disagree with these arguments, but we have to ask a question. What kind of liberalism and what kind of rule or whose rule that we are talking about? We just assume that there's something like liberalism, there's something like rule-based order, but we don't really know what's inside, what are the specific substance of these orders. One of the organizers is Indonesian CSIS, so I would like to put some Bahasa words here. I would like to differentiate kind of Ode Lama and Ode Baru. This is not, of course, about the former President Sukarno or Suharto, but what I mean by old order, Ode Lama, is something, the regional order, which was written at the end of World War II. And it worked well under the leadership of the United States. Many regional countries have been benefited by this order. They achieved economic growth, they achieved democracy, and blah, blah, blah. But since the end of the World War II, we had a lot of changes in this part of the world. The Cold War is gone, and we are talking about the rise of the rest, middle powers and small and medium powers. And the power relation among the country are quite different today if we compare today and the post-World War II period. So the question is, can you apply the same old order to the region today? Would it work as it did before in totally different strategic circumstances? So that is the central question I have. I mean, don't take my position wrong. Even if I raise a question on liberal order and rule-based order, I'm not supporting the Chinese revisionist vision. Perhaps the Chinese behavior today is the kind of older than what I mean by Ode Lama or old order written in the post-World War II period. As you know, Mr. Kurt Campbell was written in his book titled The Pivot. And he described that the US pivot is something about the competition between 19th century order and 21st century order. Of course, the 19th century order is what China is doing, and 21st century order is what the US is doing. But I would like to differentiate a little bit further. The China represents the 19th century order. The United States represent the 20th century order, and we need something like near 21st century order. So the I believe the regional small and medium powers like ASEAN, South Korea, some South Asian countries, Pacific countries, we have a job to do. So the question is, did we have any chance to input our interest in shaping a new world order or in defining a free and open Indo-Pacific order or even rule-based order? Have we put any inputs into the shaping of emerging order? That is my question. So regional small and medium powers have to discuss this point among us. What kind of rule serve our interest better? This is the central question. And I believe ASEAN has to lead this discussion, as Ambassador Ong Keng-yong in his earlier remarks, that the AOIP, the ASEAN countries has to make effort to put some substance in the AOIP. And I believe one of the job ASEAN has to do to substantiate the AOIP is to define what kind of rule and what kind of liberalism. And the regional small and medium powers concerted effort is needed, first, to prevent superpowers from writing and defining regional order as they wish, and second, to reflect regional small and medium powers' interest to the newly emerging regional order. So I tried to provoke the audience a bit, because that's basically the job I was given. I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lee, for the provocation also. The last but not least, the first speaker is Dr. Cheng-Chwee Kuik, the head of Center for Asian Studies of Universiti Kebangsaan Malaysia. But before I welcome Dr. Kuik, I will remind everyone again that after this, we will begin the discussion. I invite comments and questions. The panelists can virtually raise their hands so that I can give you screen time. Other participants can type their questions through the Q&A box in Zoom. Dr. Kuik, please go ahead.
Right. Thanks very much, Fifi, and selamat pagi, good morning, or good evening to everyone, depending on where you are. First of all, let me thank the organizers, CSIS, GRIPS, and also RSIS for having me here. So within the 10 minutes that Fifi is so kind to give me, I thought I would just share 3 observations and 1 recommendations. And I do hope to perform my task to follow the footsteps of the panelists before me, Dr. Ler, Dr. Tanaka, and also Dr. Lee, in adopting, I would say, a very positive, realistic, yet very candid and perhaps provocative in some way or in one way or another. So I would present my points along this spirit and also approaches. So my very first point, and I certainly hope to share or reflect a Southeast Asian perspective or a smaller state perspective. I do think that when it comes to Indo-Pacific, my very first point is that by now, the term Indo-Pacific is not just a construct, but it is already a strategic reality, and it is here to stay. And because of this reality, I do think that all countries, including China, should accept this as a reality. Denying or reacting in certain way would not change this reality. So I do think that this is a very important point to set, to add to the discussion. Very important points that have already highlighted by the earlier panelists. And my second point is that I think it's also a reality that by now, with all the recent developments, especially, the word Indo-Pacific and even the related terms, the so-called institutional expression of Quad, is also a code word of anti-China or even containment. And this is something that I think Pak Rizal highlighted in his paper, and I do agree that, I do think that almost all of us will agree. It might not be a reality, but it is certainly a perception. And as I said, the recent developments of Quad about the AUKUS, and in fact, the intensification of Taiwan issue with multiple actors and also different levels would only add to this dynamics and also perception. So smaller countries, and I would say that not just the ASEAN region, even outside the region, are kind of getting more nervous. On the one hand, we do welcome more countervailing forces in one way or another, and not necessarily military forces, but also non-military, to constrain China when China becomes more powerful, when China's actions also becoming more assertive or even aggressive at sea and also elsewhere. But I think smaller countries, especially in ASEAN, we do see a very important distinction between constrainment and also containment. And there is a very dangerous, it's a very thin line, but a dangerous line. And I would argue that this is reflected in many of the responses. ASEAN countries in general, we would go ahead to increase step-up partnership with basically all Indo-Pacific, the Quad members and also Indo-Pacific partners here and also outside the region. But I think you would see a very nuanced and sensitive differences that none of us really go out openly to say that we endorse the Quad, and nobody wanted to be grouped into the Quad plus, so on and so forth. Even though we welcome, we endorse the spirit of Indo-Pacific, rules-based, so on and so forth. So this is a second reality that I think all sides of the power contestation will have to realize and also accept and also respect. So now my third point is that how do we strike a balance, recognizing these two realities? I think precisely these two contrasting realities, which are going to stay, in fact, the dynamics are going to step up. I do think that the third point is that shows the increasing importance of ASEAN and also AOIP. And just like any ASEAN itself as an organization and also ASEAN-led institutions, it's inadequate but indispensable. It is not ideal, but I think it's essential and very, very important. Earlier on, Pak Yusof said that with AOIP, now the plan is to move this vision into a strategy. And Ambassador Ong Keng Yong mentioned that the current task is also to substantiate the AOIP. And I think Ambassador Imura has also very kind to recognize that ASEAN should take the lead to play the role. So I do think that I have a smaller recommendation, and that's my last point before I end my presentation, is that I do think that one of the very first steps and important points to substantiate AOIP is that we need to bring one word back in the discourse, in the discussion, and certainly in the ASEAN strategy and also policy actions. That is, in addition to free and open, the two keywords when we describe Indo-Pacific, either from Quad version or ASEAN version, I think the most important word that has to be added is neutral. And it should be a free, open, and neutral order, free, open, and neutral Indo-Pacific. And some might say that, and I understand a lot of commentators have described neutrality or ASEAN's Zopfan back in the 1970s as a naive, because of Zopfan was interpreted as a move on the part of smaller countries to try to eliminate or stop a big power rivalry. I do not think any one of us is so naive to think that big power rivalry can be eliminated. Nobody, no power, not even Washington, Beijing can really eliminate. It's part and parcel of the structural forces. We accept that reality. But the very neutrality that Zopfan spirit and also approaches is to do three things, three Ps. It's number one, to prevent the current existing big power rivalry from escalating even further. We are already in a big hole, but we should stop digging, and neutrality should emphasize that role. That's the first P. And the second P is actually to preclude the regional polarization. At the moment, we do know that there are contending forces, but ASEAN do not want to be entrapped into any of these, and we do not want to see a regional polarization from happening, especially in the Southeast Asia region. And the third P, and that's my last point, is that I think emphasize on neutral in addition to a free and open would also actually preserve the very precious, valuable space for multi-layered cooperation that are already taking place. The fact that ASEAN was able, and also partners are able to make RCEP happen even at a very difficult time of COVID and other rivalries issues is the fact that ASEAN and ASEAN mechanism, although it's not adequate, but it is indispensable. And this kind of a space for maneuvering should be welcome for everybody. It's not just for ASEAN, it's for everybody. I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kuik. So we've heard 4 very interesting remarks from our trigger speakers, all discussing the various aspects of the changing dynamics in the Indo-Pacific, but mostly highlighting the impacts of the major power rivalry and what it does to us, at least us from the perspective of Southeast Asia and ASEAN. I'd like to open the discussion. So those of you joining us as panelists, please, you can virtually raise your hand, so then I will allow you some screen time. Those of you joining us as attendees can type your questions in the Q&A box. Anybody would like to be the first commenter? Okay, if not, maybe everybody's still needing some time to construct their questions. So why don't I start off with some, I don't know, maybe some follow up from the remarks that were made by the 4 speakers, and maybe I'll begin by raising this to our ASEAN speakers. So Dr. Tin and Dr. Kuik. You've heard so much expectations of ASEAN and what we could do with the ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific. But I think at the same time, you also hear a lot of criticisms towards the ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific, how it is not a strategy and so on. What steps do you think that ASEAN needs to do? I mean, well, there have been a lot of recommendations about the need to set a strategy from the AOIP, but I think seeing that since the pandemic, we hardly ever do anything about the AOIP anymore. The previous plans to hold the infrastructure summit, for example, has been put on hold and so on. So what do you think, looking at it again from the Southeast Asian perspective, what do you think is the real future of AOIP, looking at from your perspective? Maybe I'll begin with Dr. Tin. Would you like to comment on that? And maybe after that, followed by Dr. Kuik.
Thank you, Fifi. It's not an easy question. It takes the whole ASEAN to respond to your question. Before I can make some of my comments on the future of IOIP and what should we take it from here, I would like to emphasize this thing. The discussion of the major power rivalry is valid, is necessary, but in my personal perspective, we should not let that discussion overshadow anything that we are doing here in ASEAN. Okay, and I don't think that we need to see the world from that polarized perspective by calling either the United States or China a polar, like we already witnessed during the Cold War, where we witnessed the Soviet Union and the US. The world today is so different. The power diffusion is happening. The shift of power is happening. Even the states, couldn't control big techs and big pharmaceutical companies and things like that. So I think the world is better described as a multi-centered, multi-order versus a polarization of the world order. So that kind of narrative, I think, should be avoided in ASEAN. Okay, so major power competition is high on the agenda, but shouldn't be the overwhelming item on the agenda. So let me move to the future. So I think we need to take baby steps to implement the IOIP, just for the sake of giving offering some of the tangible outcomes out of the IOIP. So the infrastructure summit is necessary. vaccine distribution is something that we can work on, and it is not that the AOIP provide this kind of mechanisms for us to do so. The job of the AOIP is to connect what we are trying to do with existing mechanisms, right? Because at the very outset, the AOIP is designed, to my understanding, to complement the existing mechanisms. So the job of the AOIP is to connect the dots, okay? It's not just, I don't want to see the AOIP like a set of projects and programs per se. I want it to enable projects and programs using existing mechanisms, and what can can help us to make the case, a compelling case for the ASEAN people and ASEAN partners, is that we can be able to come up with some of the tangible, deliverables, and one of the some of the areas that I mentioned earlier include vaccine distribution, the consolidation of the regional supply chain, and some of the emerging issues that we are badly in need to respond to. So those are some of my comments on the question. And I believe in the future of the AOIP, and the AOIP has done a terrific job, of giving us the guidance to engage with partners and with our own self. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tin. Dr. Kuik?
All right, thanks very much. So on the basis of what Dr. Tin has eloquently elaborated, I like especially his points, his emphasis on tangible outcomes, and also connect the dot. And I would think that those are exactly what the third point when we mentioned about AOIP should be the central platform, acceptable platform for everybody. So I would just add that to strengthen AOIP, clearly it's not just a matter of ASEAN member countries, but also all the dialogue partners. So at this point of time, and if I can, since I'm an academic, I can be as a very candid, I think we in Southeast Asia see that almost all dialogue partners on different sides of the power contestation have all endorsed ASEAN centrality, so on and so forth. But I think from smaller countries' point of view, those are mainly like paying a lip service. They just mention, everybody just make it a point that whenever it comes to ASEAN related meetings, you just mention that you endorse ASEAN centrality. But I think it only stopped at the talking. We do not really see the actions, the walking. So I do think that what Dr. Tin proposed, we want to see some tangible outcomes. We want to connect the dots. And I think this is where our AOIP can be developed, and then each dialogue partners in this region and outside the region should go beyond just emphasizing verbally about endorsing and supporting ASEAN centrality, but actually marry and also synthesize their own strategies, and especially I would say non-military strategy, especially, but not exclusively, with the ASEAN countries, either ASEAN as a group or individual ASEAN member countries. And ASEAN of a group, of course, should be given the emphasis. And I think there are a lot of non-military chessboard issues that can be developed. And I would say that those are not just about the pandemic cooperation, but also along the supply chain, along the connectivity development, both for infrastructure connectivity, but also other connectivity. And you see all this as the highlight when leaders of G7, for example, talk about Build Back Better World. And then EU also as a group launched the so-called, early on, there was a EU-Europe-Asia connectivity. And more recently, along with the EU Indo-Pacific document, they have also emphasized about Europe's global gateway. So I do think that AOIP is important and should be the center platform where all these emerging strategies of dialogue partners of ASEAN should come in to see more concrete outcomes and to connect the dots.
Thank you, Dr. Kuik. Anybody who would like to follow up from there? Yes, Ambassador Imura, please. You're still muted, Ambassador.
Do you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Thank you very much. I'll be brief. I really agree with those two speakers who just mentioned put the emphasis on the importance of concreteness and going ahead with concrete projects and proposals. I think if we really want to make AOIP operational strategy, then we should come up with concrete projects. And already ASEAN dialogue partners have proposed several ideas, and Japan has also presented to ASEAN 79 projects in line with 4 target areas. Now I think it's high time for the ASEAN members and also dialogue partners to come up and sit down together to discuss what we can do concretely. We should not remain the AOIP should not remain as abstract ideas, but AOIP should be concrete ideas with concrete projects, so that it. Of course, we do have already RCEP and some other existing institutions and ASEAN-led coordination mechanism, but probably we can do more in order to have to advance in line with AOIP ideas. That is, I think, what should be discussed probably among us today to advance AOIP projects. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Imura. Anyone else? If not, okay, Pa Yusuf, please.
Well, I all agree with this, developments that you mentioned, and everybody has mentioned it, about the importance that first, ASEAN has to be united, and we have to use platforms that ASEAN has created. We have an East Asian Summit, not to forget, which could be the main platform to do all these things for the, I think, for OIP. And here, then ASEAN will have already a central part, but this depending on I think on two conditions. One, ASEAN should be much more forceful in willing to do this and make use of East Asian Summit. And the secondly is, of course, for all the partners, who are members, and actually everybody is a member on both sides. And therefore, if we can convince them that this will be the main vehicle, and because ASEAN also has said, we don't want to have a new institution to be built for this effort again. So that is one step further that you have rightly pointed out how ASEAN should proceed. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Ambassador Ong first, please.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, I was just trying to unmute myself. Thank you, Fifi. I enjoyed the various presentations so far. I think it's very good that we are all in this setting to discuss what AOIP is all about and how we can substantiate it and make it better. I like the idea of Dr. Kuik, Cheng-Chwee, about the need to expand this notion of a free and open Indo-Pacific. But I also like to caution the use of the word neutral, because there will be a big debate within ASEAN what is the meaning of neutrality and how neutrality or neutral is regarded by the big powers and the bigger countries of the world. Yeah. So his suggestion raised a very interesting point, which we discussed among ASEAN member states while we were doing the ASEAN Socio-Cultural Community many years back. Yeah, and if you look at the ASEAN Socio-Cultural Community blueprint, it revolves around various things like, communicable diseases, environmental degradation, climate change danger, the threat from many of these natural disasters that we in ASEAN face almost every day, storms, volcanic eruption, earthquake, what have you. And at one point we were talking about how do we ensure a safe ASEAN, safety, safer for our women and children, safer for migrant workers, safer for everybody. So to add to the debate, I would suggest that instead of saying a free, open and neutral Indo-Pacific, we should just simply keep to our four-letter words: free, open, and safe Indo-Pacific. This is to add to your debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Ong. Dr. Lee first, and then Dr. Tanaka.
Thank you. I just would like to respond to what just Pak Yusuf said on East Asia Summit. Yeah, I'm a strong supporter of regional multilateral cooperation like ASEAN Plus 3, EAS, ADMM Plus, and ARF, and all that. It is a great instrument to manage these powers' unilateral behavior. Of course, there are rules and norms in these institutions, and it is an effective tool to a certain degree. And also to address so many non-traditional security issues and human security issues, and this multilateral platform a very effective way. But if you look at the reality, I'm just wondering if the US and China are still interested in ASEAN-led multilateral cooperation platforms. For example, once there was a time that both US and China were so much interested in East Asia Summit. They wanted to compete against their opponents within the context of a multilateral cooperation. But, some time ago, China invented their own institution, Belt and Road Initiative. It has a big picture now. And the United States was a bit late, but it's got its own big picture in the Pacific strategy and Quad, and now AUKUS. So the interest that these superpowers now have in the ASEAN, the multilateral platform, are much less than before. The question is, if we want to manage these superpowers through ASEAN-led institution, anyhow, we have to get these big powers back into the institutions. So that's my question about East Asia Summit and or ASEAN-led institution. If I add just one more sentence, South Korea is definitely supporting ASEAN-led institutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. Dr. Tanaka?
Well, thank you very much. As to the future ideas about AOIP, I would like to make a bit, I don't know, whether a bit controversial, or maybe this might be a question to our ASEAN friends. That is, AOIP, IP is Indo-Pacific. And so when you think of concrete ideas about the AOIP, it's about the Indo-Pacific, not ASEAN itself. And my pet idea is to increase connectivity between ASEAN and other regions in the Indo-Pacific. For example, particularly South Asia or Sub-Saharan Africa. I sometimes feel that, I strongly support ASEAN centrality, but I sometimes feel that the ASEAN is too much ASEAN centered. ASEAN is a vigorous regional institution with the hopeful future, the size and population, size of economy. It can act as a global actor. And I think, whether it's a better idea to increase dialogue partners, but probably you should ASEAN should make a lot more outreach beyond ASEAN in order to somehow play, if you'd like to be more neutral, well, you should cultivate your friends beyond ASEAN. And unfortunately, that Myanmar's condition is terrible, and if Myanmar had been stable, you could think of land connectivity between Southeast Asia to South Asia, but now it's a bit hard in terms of land connectivity, given the Rohingyas problems and others. But I think at least, for example, you should cultivate connectivity with such countries like Bangladesh. India is always very important, but there are many countries in Southeast Asia, South Asia that is not India, and then you could outreach, Africa too. And then also maybe you should cultivate relations with Pacific Islands nations. I think I wonder if our ASEAN friends would feel about this type of suggestions.
Thank you, Dr. Tanaka. Dr. Kuik?
All right, thanks very much. Just want to make a quick point to actually echo and also second what Ambassador Ong mentioned. I think it's a brilliant idea actually to use the word safe after free and open. I think fundamentally, safe is what everybody wants, ASEAN and non-ASEAN and beyond. And also safe is the ultimate policy end, and neutrality and other approaches are only the means. So I think this is a wonderful idea. But just to echo and also elaborate as a response to what Ambassador Ong mentioned, that neutrality itself it's also contentious within ASEAN community. And this is not new, it's not just a current situation. We knew that even back in 1970s, there was already some different interpretation about the word neutrality, hence the watered down version of Zopfan, so on and so forth. I do acknowledge about all that. And I just want to make a point that I think again, along the same contention that none of us is naive to think that eliminating a big power rivalry is possible. And the same logic, none of us think that the word neutrality or emphasis on neutrality would constitute an effective or credible shield to help us prevent us from big power's tendency. I think none of us will be so ideal or idealistic or naive along that line. But rather, I think it's about reiterate, to reassure powers of contending in the power contestation. And the other one, I think, is also to reiterate our bottom line. And that's will create some buffer and also a space for maneuver in one way or another. And I do think that the word neutrality has to be adopted in the AOIP and also the similar follow-up statements or documents, because I was quite surprised that AOIP, unless I overlook, but I don't think the word neutral or neutrality is actually included in the AOIP. And I do think that that's an important element. It's not the element, but one of the most important elements to strengthen ASEAN's bottom line, so that we do have some space, even though it's not a guarantee, but some space to maneuver, to bring a good that will benefit not only ASEAN countries, but also beyond. And very quickly, for Dr. Tanaka's point, I think what you mentioned is very ideal and also, I think, desirable but might not be feasible. ASEAN, after all, is not a big power. What we can provide is mainly an inclusive platform and also a space for everybody to maneuver. But we are not Japan, we are not big powers, impossible for us to go to other regions. And coming back to what Pak Yusof mentioned, the importance of EAS, that's exactly an evidence that ASEAN has already done what you mentioned, to reach out to others. EAS consists of not just ASEAN, but also dialogue partners. And we take the gradual approach. Initially, only 16 countries. Then when US and Russia are ready, then be included. And we know that the EU and also Canada also are knocking the door. So I think ASEAN has never been excluding or saying no to others, but depending on the conditions, depending on the feasibility. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kuik, for your explanation. And I think there are at least a couple of questions I see in the Q&A box asking you to clarify what you meant by neutrality. But so I hope your answer just now could have already satisfied all the people asking the questions. I see Dr. Tin also raising his hand, but before that, we do have some questions in the Q&A box. But what I see, one word that keeps repeating in some of the questions is about ASEAN centrality. So before I ask Dr. Tin to make his comment, maybe I'll also ask the others who might wish to comment on ASEAN centrality. There's a question about, the emergence again of AUKUS and other unilaterals, how that will impact ASEAN centrality, and also asking about, the internal challenges of ASEAN centrality. So maybe some other people might like to comment on that. But before that, Dr. Tin, please.
Thank you, Fifi. I'm going to be very brief. I also mentioned the word neutral in my talk earlier, but I add the word active and maybe proactive neutrality. So we are not proposing passive neutrality or centrality for ASEAN. ASEAN is not taking side. It should not take sides, but ASEAN should take positions that are favorable to ASEAN and ASEAN people, and hopefully favorable to the region as a whole. So, so by that we mean centrality and proactive neutrality. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tin. Mr. Imura?
Yes, thank you, Fifi. I just want to say one word regarding what Yusuf Wanandi said. He said, he talked about the importance of East Asia Summit process as a platform for moving ahead with AOIP. I think I totally agree with his idea. If the government are not ready to move ahead with using this existing framework of economic East Asia Summit, probably those scholars and researchers can form a kind of track to forum to move ahead with what we can do to substantiate AOIP based on using the platform of using East Asia Summit as platform. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Imura. Anybody else would like to make comments, perhaps regarding the ASEAN centrality? Maybe, okay, anyone? No? Okay, then if not, maybe I'll get some more questions from the Q&A box. There's also a couple of questions here. There's a question, okay, just now. Would like to seek the views of the panelists with regard to the idea of having ASEAN +2 meeting, ASEAN plus China and the US. So this is another idea for another mechanism of having, instead of an ASEAN plus China or ASEAN plus US with regards to the major power rivalry, then why not having an ASEAN +2 meeting, which is ASEAN plus China and the US. Anybody care to maybe try to discuss this question? No? Okay. Maybe I'll try to move on to another question while you elaborate on some of these issues. Pak Yusuf, I see you raise your hand.
Well, I would like to argue that you don't start now to argue to invite both of them, to have a meeting with ASEAN. I don't think nobody would like to do that, to be frank. And that's why I come back, like Imura said, why don't we use an existing one there where both are present? And others should be present because ASEAN is too small to face those two giants. But with the others, there is a possibility to discuss good things.
Thank you so much, Pak Yusuf. Okay, Dr. Tin.
I am completely on board with Yusuf Wanandi on that. We should not create another mechanism to engage with the US and China. We already have the AS, we already have the East Asia Summit and the ADMM Plus. So we should address the issue from a broader perspective, okay, not to get bogged down into the bilateral competition between the two.
Thank you. Dr. Lee, you also have a comment on this?
Yes, at the moment, the ASEAN centrality is challenged in 3 different ways. The first one is that I just mentioned as a response to Pak Yusuf, that the big powers, which used to provide some fuel into the regional multilateral cooperation and ASEAN-led institution, their interest in ASEAN-led institution decreased substantially, although they still accept and they still voice that the ASEAN centrality, but I'm not quite sure if they are really into that. And second one, is something to do with the multilateral institutions. The ASEAN centrality is best realized in these ASEAN-led multilateral institutions. And so overall, the ASEAN-led multilateral institutions are getting weaker and weaker. So the ASEAN centrality is weaker than before because these institutions are weaker. And of course, there's a challenge within Southeast Asia, like the Myanmar case, and this different perspectives on South China Sea issues. So the ASEAN unity is not guaranteed at the moment, which in turn weakens the ASEAN centrality. And regarding the ASEAN +2 idea, yeah, I agree with Pak Yusuf that it is not easy for the US and China to say, okay, why not? But it is useful as a way to show that ASEAN is still alive. ASEAN, my suggestion and recommendation for Southeast Asia or ASEAN is that you make more noise. Either it can be realized or not, make more noise. That still the ASEAN matters. You have to show that to the regional countries and big powers. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Dr. Tanaka, you have the screen.
Well, I probably should have responded immediately after Dr. Kuik's mention about ASEAN's smallness. The ASEAN is not so small, It constitutes 8.6% in terms of world population, and even the GDP, 3.5% of the world's gross production. And in terms of trade, ASEAN constitutes 8% of the global trade. ASEAN is a big player. And why do you continue to consider yourself a minor actor? I'm sorry to be a bit provocative.
Thank you. Dr. Kuik, you have your hand raised. Maybe you'd like to respond directly to that.
Yeah, thanks very much. I do appreciate these very candid and provocative questions. And of course, it's not new. But I do think that from Southeast Asians' outlook, we see a lot of things with a thin line, right? Weak and strong. There is a thin line between a lot of things. And by acknowledging, realizing that we are kind of weaker states, quote unquote, smaller countries within the larger international system, by no means implying or saying that we are doing nothing or we don't want to do anything. It's the opposite. Recognizing, realizing awareness, awareing about the we are limited. We are not big powers, strong powers like Japan or others, especially the superpowers. Only means that we need to do harder and do more to overcome our inherent limitation and also vulnerabilities. And in fact, you are good to say to highlight all the strength and also the so-called big role of ASEAN, but that's ASEAN as a group. But ASEAN is not a unitary act. We still are in reality a group of 10 different individual countries. Only Singapore is in the category of a developed country with a lot of resources. Others, we simply do not have enough resources, even for our own domestic demand and also developmental needs, let alone doing something that countries like big powers, countries like Japan and others are doing, right? So I think that's just a recognition of the reality, but it doesn't mean that we are giving up, we are doing nothing, but it's an awareness, a reminder that we need to do more. We never take things for granted. And ASEAN, as I said, is an inadequate but indispensable platform for us to manage a number of things. In fact, it's not just the outsiders, right? But also the intra-ASEAN differences, things that I think many observers outside of our ASEAN region often overlook. But again, it's part and parcel of the realities that we are facing. We might not talk about it, but we do realize that those are the things that we have to handle. It's not just about US and China. There are many other intra-ASEAN and domestic challenges that clearly is the main preoccupation of most countries in the region.
Thank you, Dr. Kuik. Pak Yusuf.
Thank you. I just would like to answer some of these issues. Partly, it is basically 40 years of ASEAN that has it, a circumstance and environment which was always conducive, positive, and so it has developed, but developed, of course, with a very small, actually, enticing surrounding. So that's why we nicely made use of that. But that means also we stick to the base that we have established. Times have changed, and the problem of this existence, and that is what Kuik has said, existence of 10 countries who are completely actually sovereign, who decided that part of their common interest maybe they could pursue together. And again, with the nice circumstance, of course, it has been relatively successful. But now we are facing heavy winds ahead. And hopefully we quicker, the quicker we realize that. And therefore, the quicker we realize that we have to change to face those new heavy winds, ahead, then hopefully we can change also quicker than we thought we could. Otherwise, it will be a very difficult period for ASEAN. And the centrality of ASEAN is just a question mark.
Thank you, Pak Yusuf. Dr. Tin, I see you raise your hands, but could I please go to Mr. Kwa Chong Guan first? And then after that, I'm going to go again through all the trigger speakers, ask them for some maybe 1 minute concluding thoughts. Pak Kwa Chong Guan, please.
Thank you. Let me add here just a historical footnote to remind us. I think the old ASEAN hands here, Yusuf Wanande, Clara Juwono, my colleague, Ambassador Ong will remember that ASEAN started with very, very modest expectations in 1967. It was to bring together Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore to resolve their differences. And for the first 10 years, it remained essentially a foreign ministers' club. The heads never met until the first crisis struck in 1975, when South Vietnam fell, and quickly we convened the first ASEAN Heads of Government meeting in 1976 in Bali. We all were, those of us who are of that age will remember that. And then after that, the second crisis was 1979, when Vietnam invaded Cambodia and we came together to defend what we perceive to be our collective interest. And after the end of the Cold War, 1989, we expanded, again in response to changing conditions, we expanded ASEAN to what it is now today, the 10 of us. And in 1992-93, we expanded, we reached out to our dialogue partners and formed the ARF. So ASEAN has always been responding to crises and developments around us. The East Asia Summit was similarly formed in response to new challenges and crises. So the AOIP we are discussing today is similarly a response to a new crisis. And the issue then is, what is the status of this AOIP in comparison to other documents? Is it AOIP a vision statement that the 10 of us in ASEAN have come together as the minimum understanding of what we are? Or is it a master plan, as our Japanese colleagues think that we have agreed to, as to how to go and move out to change the world here? So I think there are vast differences. There's a different understanding of what ASEAN is about and what it can do here. Of course, we are grateful that our Japanese and colleagues think that we can do a lot more. But I think we in ASEAN are a bit more modest about our expectations here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kwa Chung Wan. So now I think we are coming to the end of the first session, which has been, very rich discussion, I think. I'd like to go back to our four trigger speakers for their, some concluding thoughts, maybe 1 or 2 minutes each. I'll go back to the order of speaking. So first, Dr. Tin, please.
Thank you, Fifi. Just one sentence. So given the, the very modest but considerable capability of ASEAN, for example, ASEAN is in the top 4 largest trading partner of either the US or China. I think ASEAN is well positioned to negotiate with partners the way forward using vehicles like the AOIP. Okay, we are not here to be dictated what to do. So that kind of strategic belief should be sustained in ASEAN. That's my final thought. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Tanaka.
Thank you very much. I think modesty is a virtue, and it's good to be modest. But from my perspective, I worked in JICA and then visited many countries in the world, many developing countries. And then my feeling is that ASEAN's experiences can be very useful to many other developing countries who try to overcome the challenges of sustainable development goals and others. And I don't like ASEAN friends to have many more meetings. ASEAN probably has too many meetings already. But I would like, humbly request the, ASEAN member states and ASEAN as a whole to engage with many more developing countries so that they can be benefited from your experiences and wisdoms with being modest is very important to engage with many other developing countries, and then they can be very useful. And so that's my request. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lee.
Thank you. I'm basically looking at South Korea's new southern policy towards Southeast Asia, and one of the most common questions that I get from my Southeast Asian colleagues is that what's the Korea's strengths between China and Japan? China and Japan has big money to spend on Southeast Asia, and whenever I get that kind of question, my answer is that, South Korea is a small pocket compared to China and Japan, so we do something modest on our own to Southeast Asia. And then my colleague from Southeast Asia replied to me that, oh, Dr. Lee, that's not quite true. South Korean economy is very big, and you have a big soft power, cultural power. You got a lot of job you can do in Southeast Asia. I would like to get this answer back to my Southeast Asian colleague. You are not that small. You got a lot of resource. You got a lot of strengths. And you have to make more noise and even controversy in the region to show your presence. That's my advice. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Dr. Kuik.
Yeah, I think within the 1 minute that I have, I will just make two very, very quick points in a way as a reflection and also as a response. Number one point is that let's not forget all politics is local, and eventually ruling elites of the day in all capitals, what preoccupied them more, it's always the domestic need and also national development and how to win the next election and remain in power. There is lots of constraint. That's point number one. Point number two, I think I echo what Mr. Kwon mentioned. And if I understand him correctly, his points is not just about the modest part, but it's also acknowledging that we are modest ambition and origins, but also responsive. So it's modest, but responsive. And being responsive, meaning that we are not overstretching too ambitious and all that, but we are responding in the sense that prevailing crises and challenges one by one, gradual, and things are being accumulated. And my last point is that, and that's relating to Dr. Tanaka's earlier mentioned that comment and critiques that ASEAN has been too focusing about ASEAN centrality. And I do think that from Southeast Asia's perspective, we want to convince our dialogue partners that ASEAN centrality is a good thing, not just for Southeast Asia, for ASEAN countries. ASEAN centrality is a good thing for all the dialogue partners, including and especially the different sides of the power contentions, because we provide a platform for all of us to collaborate, maybe compete, but eventually also for cooperation that benefits everyone. So it's not just for us, it's for everybody.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kuik. So we've come to the end of our first session. So thank you so much again for the 4 trigger speakers and also every other participants who have gave their comments and also questions to help us enrich the discussion. So I think we will take a very short break, I think about 5 minutes. Before we begin the second session. But again, thank you so much for all the 4 speakers who have so kindly joined us and shared their thoughts with us this morning. So we will take a 5-minute break. After the break, I will directly hand over to the moderator of session 2, who is Dr. Bethan Greener, Associate Professor from Massey University in New Zealand. Session 2 will be about the changing economic order in the Indo-Pacific. So enjoy your 5-minute break and we will see you again soon.